All right, this round is now being recorded. You guys are all aware of that, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, so is it okay if I give an off-time roadmap? Or do you? It's going to be brief anyway, so I don't think it's that important. Okay, so to start, I'd first like to thank everyone in attendance and give you a roadmap. I'm going to start by defining the terms of the resolution and explaining our plan. Then I'm going to go over a summary of what's going on in Cyprus, just so everyone's on the same page about what's going on, what the problems are, and what the potential solutions are. And then we're going to go into our two contentions. So starting my time now. The resolution reads, Cyprus should default on its debt and leave the eurozone. It's a pretty straightforward resolution. The word should implies this is a policy round, so the government of Cyprus will be taking an action. Defaulting on its debt essentially says to its creditors, we're not paying you back, and that results in them having to leave the eurozone. Because they're in a lot of debt right now, their debt actually exceeds their GDP, and so what Cyprus is going to do is leave the eurozone, which is the monetary union between 20-plus European countries that puts them all in the same currency. So we're going to be leaving this currency. That's essentially the resolution, which leads us into our plan, which is essentially that the government of Cyprus will go from the euro to the Cypriot pound, which is the currency they were on before they went to the euro, through normal ways and means, and they will be staying in the European Union, which is possible. We see this is a possibility according to many analysts in the region, yes.
All right, you say that Cyprus is, so you're saying that Cyprus is already in the European Union, but it's not, though. It's actually, the European Union said it's contingent unless they fix their debt policy, they won't enter into the actual European Union, but they can stay in the eurozone.
Okay, this may come up more in the round, I see, but Cyprus is already in the European Union. They're in the European Union and in the eurozone, and so they're going to leave the monetary part of it, which is the eurozone. They're going to be leaving the currency. They're going to stay in the European Union. For another example of this, you can look at Britain, a country that's in the European Union but not on the euro, so we can see that this is possible. So moving on, that's essentially our plan text. It's pretty straightforward. And the net benefits in this round will be to Cyprus, specifically because the government of Cyprus acts to benefit its own people, its own economy, etc. So basically this round is going to come down to, should Cyprus take a bailout or should they leave the eurozone? These are the only two options they really have. So in this round, the negation team will be arguing that bailouts are preferable to exit, and we'll be arguing that exit and creation of a new currency is more beneficial to Cyprus. So just to give you some background on the topic, Cyprus's economy is made up of three main sectors. First, real estate. Second, tourism. And three, business services, especially looking at being a tax haven for foreign investors. These three things, real estate, tourism, and business services, make up 59% of their GDP. So you can see that analysis of these three areas will be key in the round, and looking at the effects on these areas. So just to give you some background on what's happening, Cyprus has had a lot of foreign investment, especially from Russian investors who are looking to Cyprus because they have extraordinarily low taxes for long-term loans. But then what happened is Cyprus lent a lot of money to Greece when Greece had its financial crisis, which it's still in, but when it kind of came to the climax of that last year, Cyprus lent Greece a lot of money that it didn't get back, and so because of that faulty loan, the banks in Cyprus are failing. So the result of this is that they're now needing a lot of their own bailouts from the European Central Bank. The money is mainly coming from Germany, and Germany's putting a lot of conditions on the bailouts. They're saying that they want Cyprus to put 10% taxes on all money people are putting in banks. They say that people can't cash checks anymore, that you can only take out $300 a day, you can only put in this much. They're putting a lot of restrictions on what people in Cyprus can and cannot do with their money. Especially the money in Cyprus right now is not allowed to leave the country. You can't take your euros out of Cyprus or into Cyprus right now. So this is essentially the situation that's happening right now, and the two options are bailout. They've already received one bailout, but they're going to need more. It's going to have more restrictions, and versus an exit, yes.
How much is the Germany bailout?
What?
How much money is Germany giving to
They're
Cyprus?
giving hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't know the exact number of the next bailout, but it's a lot of money, and it so far hasn't been really working to helping the Cypriotian economy. So they're going to have to essentially enact austerity measures. So going into our I'm not going to take another point this time. Going into our two contentions, our first is devaluation of currency and explaining why that's actually good for Cyprus's economy. And second, looking at sovereignty, that Cyprus could increase their sovereignty with this plan. It would be good for political efficacy and some investor and consumer confidence. So first thing, devaluation of currency. So when a country leaves their current currency and goes to a different one, we see a lot of devaluation occurring, which essentially means the money is worth less. We accept on the affirmation team that this is the reality. It's also going to happen on the negation team's side, as the money isn't really worth much right now. But we're saying that more devaluation when they quickly leave the currency will be beneficial. We're saying it's good for the first because they can pay off their debt more easily. When your currency is devalued, the debt is essentially worth less because your money is worth less, so you have less debt. They can pay back all of the debt that they own more effectively. Furthermore, this isn't going to be that difficult for Cyprus because the Cypriotian wages are extraordinarily high. They're much higher than in any other country because people in Cyprus just make a lot of money for their jobs. So if they did have to face wage cuts, we're saying this wouldn't be too significant, wouldn't necessarily lead to unemployment, and people could deal with this reality. Now, the second thing is that it's going to increase their competitivity, especially in the three key sectors I mentioned previously. So first, real estate. We can see that when houses are worth less in Cyprus, more people are going to want to buy them. You can look to people already in Cyprus. People who are living there could go buy a house because they're going to be worth so much less. Or second, people who don't live in Cyprus could buy a second house in Cyprus, move to Cyprus, because they're still going to be in the European Union. Real estate is a huge market. When people are buying houses, you see this a growth first in the sector for building houses. So you see a lot of lower level jobs and also other jobs. So you see a lot of job creation because of this, and also a lot of money flowing into the economy. And the devaluation is key in increasing the real estate sector. Looking at the second sector, we see tourism. Tourism will increase because products are cheaper. People like to go to countries where they can buy things for more cheaply than they could at home. So we're going to see a boost to tourism, which is also going to help the economy. And third, business services. More people will want to invest in Cyprus if they see that the taxes are remaining low. As opposed to with the bailout, they're going to see 10% taxes on any money anyone's putting in. So essentially, you're going to see more Russians are the main people investing in Cyprus, putting their money in if there's currency devaluation and still low taxes. And this is also going to help the economy. Going on to our our second contention, which is sovereignty. We see the harms right now is that Cyprus is really dependent on decisions made by the German government. The Germany is essentially the country giving other countries their bailouts, and so being dependent on Germany is not good. I'm not going to take another point this time, I only have a minute left. So first, we see riots happening. We're seeing riots happening already in Cyprus, and you can also look to the example of Greece. We saw extraordinary riots and a lot of political upheaval when Greece was having to take these austerity measures and listen to other governments. So this is a harm here. Furthermore, we're going to see that there just isn't a lot of money. There isn't a lot of money in Cyprus right now, and that people are not liking the government. We also see the other harm being investor and consumer confidence, that people are not confident in the economy because another government is controlling them. Now the link here is that when they leave the currency and create their own, the government is going to have more influence on what happens within their own country. And this influence is uniquely good for two reasons. Number one, we're going to see them not enact these same measures, not have these high taxes on banks, because this is what's brought them success in the past. So you're going to prevent these riots and increase political efficacy, which my partner will impact out in his speech. So we have the benefit of political efficacy. The second benefit we have to this point is investor and consumer confidence, because taxes will remain low. This is the main reason investors invest in Cyprus's economy, is because taxes are low, and we can maintain these low taxes with our plan. Next, we're going to see more consumer confidence because people understand their country is taking a step to make a change. It couldn't really be any worse than it is right now, so it's going to get better for consumers as well. So for the reasons of devaluation of currency and benefits to individual sovereignty of Cyprus, I urge a vote for the affirmation team.
Alright, I'm just going to be going AC, and then I'm going to go NC. Alright, everyone's ready? Yep. Judges? Sam? Alright, so the first thing I was going to talk about, really, they give this really just introduction about the three sectors of Cyprus, and that's correct, but really something they don't really understand is the differentiation between the European Union and the eurozone. Now, the eurozone is the monetary coalition of these European Union, and it's between 17 states. Now, the only one of these states, or the two nations within this, that have the ability to not be in the eurozone but still in the European Union are, in fact, de facto Sweden and Britain. Cyprus is not one of those nations. It's not in the European Union, it's only in the eurozone. In fact, Cyprus was going to enter into the European Union, but is barred because of their financial crisis. Until they fix their financial crisis, they cannot enter the European Union. So all this they see is they can't claim the impacts of the European Union if they're not in the eurozone. Furthermore, going in their first contention, they talk about the devaluation of currency. They talk about how the dollars will be worthless and it's much easier to pay off more debt. But let's look at the fact that actually devaluation of currency is actually inherently bad. Let's look at what actually happens on a societal level when these devaluation of currency happens. When the money is worth less, people are not more likely to go out and spend more money. We see examples of this, in fact, in the Great Depression and in fact in the recession. In 2008, when Obama gave this stimulus package to these people to tell them to go out and spend more money, try to stimulate cash flow, they inherently kept the money to themselves. They saved it. This time I have a lot to get through. I'll tell you when I can. They basically kept the money to themselves. They didn't go out and spend it, right? So we see that when the entire state of the economy is bad, this actually doesn't increase consumer confidence. It decreases consumer confidence. It shows the inability of the government to protect these people, the inability of the government to provide economic stability and assistance to their own people. So as we see, the devaluation of currency is bad. And they talk about how this actually increases competition and it gets more people to do it, and how it creates more jobs. But at the end of the day, right, we see an increase in actual goods, right? Because of the fact that the currency is less, more goods are actually worth more. We see that when the devaluation of currency, in World War I, when the German marks were worth it, it took over 1 million marks to get one loaf of bread, right? So the cost of living would actually increase because prices are going to increase, right? These prices are going to increase because the money's worth less, right? The companies have to have some way to make profit. So just you can see that devaluation of currency is actually inherently a bad thing because it provides a number of negative benefits for the people of Cyprus. Now going to this idea of sovereignty, they talk about how this is dependent on Germany, right? So as we can see is that are they still going to get the German loans if they're in the eurozone? No, they're not, because the German loans are contingent on their being existing in the eurozone. They can't say that they're going to get these German loans if they're not in the eurozone. So really, if they don't even have those German loans, how are they going to do anything at all because they don't have the capital to do so? Furthermore, actually a negative plan of actually staying in the eurozone actually protects sovereignty because of new president Nikos Anastasiades' position. Nikos Anastasiades actually wants to stay in the eurozone. The president of Cyprus wants to stay in the eurozone and work out the problems and not just give up. Furthermore, let's look at the fact that actually defaulting on loans is essentially giving up. That really has these ideological impacts for Cyprus because it shows that it is a nation that is not worth fighting. It really has a myriad of negative impacts because when the legitimacy of a nation as a whole decreases, it inhibits their ability for foreign policy as a whole. It inhibits their ability to interact with other nations because they're viewed as a quitter. So let's see that the two contentions the affirmative brings up doesn't really stand. Now let's go to the negative case. So I have 8 disads. Let's look at the first one. Let's look at the fact that actually leaving the eurozone would lose the $10 million bailout that they received on March 22nd, 2012. On March 22nd, 2012, the IMF and the eurozone gave Cyprus a $10 billion bailout, which is 60% of their GDP. Now essentially what Nikos Anastasiades' plan is for this is he wants to use this money to basically stimulate the 3 sectors of the economy. So as we can see, it's because of the fact that this money is so new, and the fact is that Nikos Anastasiades is very committed to taking this money and revitalizing these sectors of the economy, and these loans are not contingent with the same dependencies that the German loans were. We can see that these loans will actually be more effective. So the fact is that they can use this money to increase the 3 sectors that they have. So all the benefits they talked about, which is like increasing competition and job creation, we're going to turn all those benefits coming off the first disad because of the fact that with more capital, the government can create more jobs and we don't have to devalue our currency. So preventing the harms, like I said, of these lack of consumer confidence, but we're getting all the positive impacts. Furthermore, let's look through our second disad, which talks about the fact that the Cypher pound would be worthless without the eurozone. As we can see, is that they make the Cypher pound. What are they going to back it on? They can't back it on the gold standard. Cyprus doesn't have any gold. Now, the most logical thing to do is they can back to the British pound, but they can't do that if they're not in the eurozone or the European Union, right? So see that even though they would do this, their currency would be worthless, and this devaluation would lead to a myriad of negative harms. Because really, let's look at the fact that when this devaluation occurs, it devalues the deposits, and really devalues the deposits of the 2 largest banks, the banks of Cyprus and the banks of Laiki. And really, when the deposits that they have, like these German deposits, are devalued, their money is worth less. So German investors and Russian investors, these people that are coming in, are not going to want to invest in Cyprus because of the fact that if they invest in Cyprus, their money is going to be worth less. Furthermore, let's look at the fact that this actually increases inflation. When they have no money and have to print their Cyprus pounds, they're going to have to print more money without any backing. That's going to increase the inflation, and that's really going to be the negative impacts that come off of inflation. Furthermore, let's do our fourth disad, which actually looks at the fact that it actually harms the rest of Europe. What the eurozone is a coalition of trade partners. Cyprus trades with all these other nations, primarily Syria, Egypt, and Turkey, the 3 nations surrounding it. And because when they're not in the eurozone, they are not able to trade with these nations, thus we can see that this is inherently going to harm Cyprus because of the fact that Cyprus does not have any production sectors of their economy. 80% of their textiles, chemicals, electronics, and machines are imported. All of their oil is imported. Essentially, we can see without these trade relations with these other nations, they don't have the ability to provide basic goods. Yes?
Why would the trade relations stop considering those countries are not in the eurozone?
Yes, they are. Turkey is in the eurozone, and furthermore, let's look at the fact that Syria and Egypt aren't in the eurozone, but like we said, their trade they would not trade with them because of the devaluation of currency. But people like Turkey and France, where they get another majority of the things, their trade relations are going to stop. Furthermore, Greece is another example of this because they get all these loans to surrounding nations, so that's going to hurt the people of Cyprus. All right, let's look to our fifth one, which talks about the loss of imports, right? All these imports are very, very important to the Cyprus people. And overall, we have to see that the Cypriot people are going to get harmed because they're losing these imports that they have from these surrounding nations. All right, let's look to our sixth one, which talks about how the devaluation of currency actually causes costs to increase, right? Because the devaluation of currency is existing, the cost of individual goods will increase because companies have to try to maintain profit. They have to try to remain competitive. And what this will do is it'll increase the average price of average goods for the consumer. And this is going to have a myriad of negative impacts because it's going to cause an inability of the consumer to buy necessary goods, not even luxuries, but necessities. And that's really important to see for the Cypriotic people. And lastly, let's look to our seventh disad, which talks about the fact that deficits would actually increase, right? Because there is no backing and the devaluation of currencies, there's going to be an increase amount of deficit spending. And we see the Cypriotic national debt deficit will continue to increase to the point where they cannot return from this. Furthermore, let's look at the fact that actually defaulting harms. Now really they talk about how we should be viewing net benefits for the Cypriotic people. Negative disagrees. We think that we should look for net benefits for the entire world. As we can see, it's because we're losing a significant trade partner in Cyprus for other nations in the European Union and the eurozone. Essentially, we can see that we're going to be harming nations in Europe as well. So all of these negative impacts that negation brings up are really solved by not leaving the eurozone and by not defaulting on our debt. We're saving Cyprus as a whole, saving our image, and as a result, providing for the benefits of not only the Cypriotic people, but the people of Europe and the rest of the world as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, is everyone ready? Brief roadmap and we'll go to our opponent's case and our own. First, addressing net benefits. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about today is the net benefits. We set them to Cyprus and our opponents set them to the world. We think the net benefits should still remain for Cyprus because obviously the Cypriotian government is acting for its own benefit. They're acting for the benefit of the people of Cyprus. They're acting for the benefit of the economy of Cyprus. They're not going to be regarding how England's economy or how Germany's economy is going to be benefited by leaving leaving the euro. They're only thinking about their own economy. So the net benefit should remain to Cyprus because this is really what we're talking about. The government of Cyprus acts for the people of Cyprus. The first thing I want to talk about is our opponent's first contention about losing the bailout. Now our opponents basically contend that this bailout that's coming from the eurozone is going to be put into investment to increase GDP in all these different sectors, but this is really a misunderstanding of what the bailout is. The bailout isn't going to Cyprus so the Cypriots can invest it in real estate or invest it in these different sectors of the economy. The bailout is going to restructure these large banks, and the bailout is basically going to restructuring of banks. It's not going and a paying off of loans. Our opponents kind of contend that, okay, the president of Cyprus is going to take all this money and he's going to invest in the GDP, so we're going to see an increase in GDP, but this isn't what the bailout is. The eurozone isn't giving money to Cyprus so they can invest it. They're giving it so they can pay off their loans and restructure their banks. The next thing I want to talk about, yes?
Are you aware that the $10 billion loan that was given to the Cyprus was given directly to the government and not the banks and was used in order as a stimulus package?
Yes, but there are terms on this loan. This loan isn't to be given to the government to use it however it will. This money is to be used to restructure banks and pay off loans. Of course, the government, the eurozone isn't just giving money with no strings attached. The second contention I want to talk about is basically a lot of our opponents' contentions have to do with devaluation and all this huge impacts of harms to inflation and devaluation of currency. But really, our opponents really never address the fact that the wages of Cypriots are actually extremely high. That people in Cyprus have extremely high wages compared to everyone else in the world, and this is really a main component of why their debt is so large and so huge. So basically, by devaluing the currency all at one time, yes, the GDP is going to take a small hit, but these huge increases in inflation don't really happen because the Cypriots have too much money. They're earning too much money anyway. So really, what we're going to see is an equilibrium in the market because when the supply of money by the Cypriots is too much, basically we're just seeing an equilibrium because the Cypriots have too high wages, and this is something our opponents never really address or contend. The next thing I want to talk about is trading partners. Our partners talk about Syria, Turkey, and Egypt, and how they're basically losing all these trading partners. Of course, this isn't true because, first of all, as my partner brought up, Egypt and Syria aren't even in the eurozone. So, of course, there's going to be no detriment here. But also, we're going to see that yes, despite by going back to the Cypriotian pound, yes, the economy of Cyprus is going to have to be rebuilt, but it's better than the alternative, which is bailout. So we can see right now that the Cypriotian people can barely even take money out of their banks to spend. They can only take 300 euros a day to spend in the economy. But by going back to the Cypriotian pound, we'll see more consuming, we'll see more money transferring hands, and therefore we'll see in the long term a growth in GDP. It is estimated that if Cyprus takes this bailout, we will see a 20% loss in GDP over the next couple of years. But if Cyprus can default and have a new currency, we will see, yes, we'll see a small hit on the GDP, but over the long term, we'll see a regrowth of the sectors. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any more points because the rest of your 7 contentions to get through. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is devaluation. Again, this is this main misunderstanding of the opposition team that the Cypriot people have extremely high wages, and by basically devaluing this currency, there'll be more currency in the hands of these people. They'll have more access to the Cypriotian currency, and there will be more spending. Next, our opponents talk about deficits increasing, but there's really no evidence for this point. And then they talk about the harms of default, but really what we're seeing is that yes, but really the economy of Cyprus will grow in these key sectors. 59% of the economy is based on real estate, is based on tourism, and is based on business sectors. And we'll see that these will all have a growth in international competitiveness when the currency of Cyprus is devalued. Because if I'm an American and I want to travel to Cyprus, I'm more incentivized to do so when the money of Cyprus is worth less. So I bring my money to Cyprus and I'm spending my money. We can already see in the status quo that the buying power of the euro in Cyprus is extremely limited in the status quo, because you cannot even take your European money, your euros out of Cyprus and spend it in the international economy, because the terms of the bailout limit you from doing so. You can't even take your European your eurozone money out of the bank because the terms of the bailout limit you to do so. So basically, by defaulting and then getting a new currency, we're going to see more consumer spending and more flow in the economy. So on this note, I'll go back into our first contention, which is devaluation. So our opponents basically say people are less likely to spend money, but this is really better than the status quo when the Cypriotian people can barely spend money at all because they can't even take money out of their banks, and their deposits are taxed in their own banks. Basically, what's happening is what the Cypriotian people are seeing is that the money they have earned hard for and the money they have worked hard for and put into their banks is basically being taken out by a group of people in Brussels that have no connection to them. And this really connects to this whole point of political efficacy and sovereignty, which I'll get into. But also, but by devaluing the currency and getting a new currency, we're going to see more spending because you'll have more access to your own money. The next thing I want to talk about is sovereignty, and this kind of connects to this idea of legitimacy. So our opponents basically say the president wants to stay in the eurozone, but we can see based on the rioting, based on the extreme anger of the Cypriots, that the people do not want to do so. And this is really what this political legitimacy point comes down to, that the people of Cyprus don't like this bailout. And what happens when the government implements plans that the people don't like? We see rioting, of course, but we also see a loss in efficiency in all sectors of the economy and government, and we just see anger on the behalf of the Cypriot people that their government is not acting on their own behalf, and this all impacts out to long-term instability, which is a huge possibility in Cyprus because of the extreme anger at the bailout instituted by Brussels. And so the next thing, the nation. So basically, we can see that yes, both plans are bad. Cyprus is in a bad position, but by defaulting on its loans and reverting the Cypriotian pound, it is better than accepting the bailout.
Okay, I'm gonna go MCAC. Alright, I'm Schiffris. I'm the second speaker on the negation over this resolution. Cyprus should default on its loans and the eurozone. Now, one thing actually I want to address before I jump into the MC is this kind of misconception that my opponents have in this debate today. And what they really don't understand is that Cyprus is not part of the European Union. The European Union and the Eurozone are completely different groups. Although they have many similar ties, there are differences. For example, Great Britain is part of the European Union, but not part of the Eurozone because they are in the British pound. Whereas Cyprus isn't part of the European Union, but they're part of the Eurozone because they are on the euro, but they're not in the actual European Union, where it's more of the governmental side to these organizations. And a lot of their impacts on this debate and a lot of their solvency comes off of the fact that they are part of the European Union, which they are not, and that's a fact today. That is a truism. Cyprus is not part of the European Union. So now let's jump into the MC. So first, we bring up our first disadvantage, which is they lose the bail. Now, essentially, this has gone kind of contested in this debate today. It's what this debate's really going to come down to. So essentially, we both agree in this debate that Germany and the rest of the International Monetary Fund, being the European zone and its partners, did give Cyprus a $10 billion bailout. And they come up here and they try to talk about how this bailout is good because it will help stimulate the banks. But what they fail to recognize is that that bailout doesn't have the conditions that they think it does in this debate today. That bailout, this $10 billion that they that are being talked about in this debate today, can actually be used by the government in any way they would like it to be used. Yes.
So you're saying the debts of Cyprus won't be paid off?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they can use the money, the bailout, the $10 billion bailout money that they get in ways that they can stimulate the economy and possibly pay it back later. But defaulting and leaving the eurozone is not the solution at this time. Yeah, I'll take your point.
So what's going to happen with the Cypriot debt if the money is just going to stimulating new programs?
Well, the Cypriotic debt will eventually get paid off, but first you have to pay off the loans. And essentially, like with any economy in the world, there's always going to be times of economic downturn, and there's always going to be times of economic surplus. So we have to see that right now they're in a time of economic downturn, and stimulation is key for paying back loans. And defaulting and leaving the eurozone is clearly not the solution. Secondly, a lot of their impacts come off of the idea that they would get to keep this $10 billion, and after they defaulted, they would still have these $10 billion after they left the eurozone, they would still have these $10 billion. But what they failed to recognize is there was actually one condition for this bailout, and that was they had to remain a member of the eurozone. That was one thing that Germany made very clear, was that for them to receive the $10 billion, that they would have to remain in the eurozone. And so all the impacts that they gain from this $10 billion loan absolutely have no grounds in this debate today, due to the fact that they are advocating that Cyprus leaves the eurozone, in which case the bailout would not exist. So now let's jump into our 2nd through 7. Okay, so the Cyprus pound is worth nothing. And so they come in here and they talk about how, if they were to go on their new currency, that it would basically be great because everyone would be able to go out and spend, there would be increased real estate, there would be increased tourism, more people would be spending money, there would be increased travel around the world. But what they fail to recognize is that the European Union or the other European states that would still be on the euro, and the United States and all the other countries essentially of the world would simply not value this currency at all. I'm not going to take your point this time, but I'll let you know if I can in the future. The value of this currency will be worth nothing. There's going to be so much inflation, which is actually our third disadvantage. There would be so much inflation with this new currency just to get it rolling, due to the fact that the devaluation, that we would see that the currency would be absolutely worth nothing. And they talk about how there's very high wages, and so there would be equilibrium with this. But what they fail to recognize is that the economy and consumer prices follow consumer wages. That's just simply the inherent flow of the economy. As wages increase, so do consumer good prices. So there's actually that argument they bring up about the high wages absolutely makes no sense, because inflation would still exist just due to the fact that consumer prices just follow wages. So next we have to look to the fourth one, which is that harms European trade. And we look to the fact that 80% of the goods of Cyprus are imported. And they come up here and they talk about how, those trading partners aren't even part of the European Union, but that's not the main part of the argument. That's not the meaty part of the argument. Being members of the eurozone allows them to have a greater and more significant trade with all these other countries. And them leaving the eurozone would have to make them have to form an independent trading partners with all these different countries. And being part of the eurozone already has this set up a way to trade with other countries. And we see that the trade would be very, very much impacted if they were to leave the eurozone. And they really have no answer to that. All they say is simply that those countries are not part of the eurozone. Real quick.
So, but considering that money is not allowed to leave Cyprus right now, how is trade going to occur in the future? Well,
trade doesn't necessarily have to revolve around like actual money. Trade is other goods, and it's that they're kind of independent of each other. So we can't really look at that as an example. So then we look to our fifth one, we're going on to the sixth one, which is increased cost of individual goods, in which they actually, you can extend this across the flow because they don't really answer this in their last speech. And essentially what we talk about there is their prices would rise from devaluation. It essentially goes along the lines of inflation. And we see that would be very detrimental to the Cyprus economy because of this new currency, would essentially cause all the prices of all these consumer goods to be at a constant increase and increase before, and there would be really no value to it. It would simply just have all these prices at very high, all these goods at very high prices for no reason. Last, we look to deficit increase, which they really also don't talk about either. And we see that with this new currency, since it would be absolutely worth nothing, we have to have increased deficit spending, which is obviously bad because that would lead to more deficit deficit. So then we were going to go on to the AC, which is first they talk about the devaluation of currency, and they talk about how that's beneficial actually because we can have more real estate, more tourism, more Russians would be investing, but we can actually see that's bad. And we looked at the examples of the Obama stimulus package where we see that when he gave out this money, these people didn't go out and spend it. We see that really the example of the whole Great Recession, the Great Recession as a whole, but we see that that's actually extremely detrimental, devaluation of currency due to inflation. And next we look to sovereignty, and they talk about how there's these riots, but the riots aren't because of like the bailouts. They're actually just because mad, just as anyone else would if they were, didn't have their money and they had a bad economy. But it would actually be much worse if they were to leave the eurozone. One, because they wouldn't have the bailout, and they would have the ideological view as being a quitter, which would cause more riots, and that would be bad for the whole international community. So when we impact that, we see that the negation actually has a stronger impact if we were to leave the eurozone. So we see that there must be negation of today.
Opponents ready? Judges ready? All right. I'm just going to be going over voters. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is really the differentiation between the German loans we talk about, the International Monetary Fund loan that we're talking about. Now, the German loan they're talking about, what did in fact happen? And it did have all these contingencies, but it did not work for the Cyprus people. And as we can see, these loans with contingencies that we see in Greece and Ireland, all these loans with these stipulations didn't in fact work. So the IMF's new approach to this was give them a loans and give it to the government and have them allocate the funds as they see fit. And Nikos Anastasiades, the president of Cyprus, has stated that he wants to stimulate these individual sectors like tourism, real estate, and business. And as a result, we can turn all the impacts coming off of their first contention. The increased competitiveness, all of these things that they talk about in their first contention, let's turn all those positive impacts for the negation. Because we can use this money and better allocate it because we're giving them direct stimulus. And it's actually better than actually having devaluation because these positive impacts as a result of devaluation comes as a positive impact as a result of a negative. But if we give them money and actually have positive capital, we have a positive force and we're seeing positive impacts coming off of that. So that's the first motive that we have, is that the current loan is not the same as these stipulations and it turns all the positive impacts that the affirmation brings up, like increasing competitiveness, increasing jobs, all of those things. So we solve for that. Secondly, we look to our second motive, which actually talks about the devaluation actually back. They say high wages, the people have high wages, but they don't prove that every single person in Cyprus has high wages. In fact, we look at the fact that as in any country, there is a small portion of society that has high wages, and the rest of the society does in fact have these normal sized wages. And first of all, they don't even link how high wages link into devaluation good. In fact, devaluation is actually really bad because it increases the costs of everyday prices. And when the costs of everyday prices increase, it doesn't matter how much money you have because the costs are still more than the money you have. So it doesn't really matter. So that's one thing, is that devaluation bad doesn't really work. Devaluation good doesn't really work, and devaluation is actually bad. Furthermore, let's look at the third motive which links into that, which is actually cost will increase. Cost for the average consumer will increase, and they won't be able. If you can't buy food, that is not a benefit. If you are starving because you don't have the ability to buy food for your family, that in no way is a positive, and that is what the affirmative is giving you. People starving, right? Let's go look to the fact of our fourth motive. Let's look at net benefits. I talk about net benefits for the Cyprus people. Well, let's look at what Cyprus is in. Cyprus is in the eurozone, which is a coalition of other nations. So everything that they do, their actions are not only for the actions of their people, but also for their trade partners. So we must prefer net benefits because it's a more holistic view. It's a holistic view of the world, and we have to stand here and consider the implications not only in an individual society, but its interactions with the rest of the world. So let's pref net benefits over this, and when we pref net benefits, we have to see that we're actually solving and preventing harms in other countries, like Germany and England and France, all those countries that trade with Cyprus. So really, we solve for these other countries as well. So this we can see that we're preventing harms in other countries. And lastly, let's look at this idea of the deficit, right? They said that we said the deficit spending will increase. They said we have no evidence. Basically, what we said is because the prices are going to be higher and money is going to be worse, less governments have to spend more. And when they spend money that they don't have because they're going to lose the bailout when they default on the loan and leave the eurozone, they're going to have to do deficit spending. And furthermore, let's look at the time frame, right? So we leave the eurozone, we lose these $10 billion. Then we as a Cyprus people, what do we do until we can create our new pound? We have that period of limbo where we would actually see increased amounts of riots and increased infrastructure because the transition won't be immediate. If we lose the $10 billion bailout, there's no way that they can restructure their entire economy to a different backed currency in one night. It would take a significant amount of time, and as a result, in that time, there would be this period of insecurity for the Cyprus government. And really that links in this idea of sovereignty. Now that's really my next part, which talks about sovereignty. They said that they're actually protecting sovereignty. We're actually protecting sovereignty because the democratically elected president, Nikos Anastasiades, said that he wants the bailout. And as a result, the people have reflected his views that they want the bailout to try to work for their economy. Furthermore, if Cyprus is seen as a quitter and default on their loans, not only did they anger the people of the IMF, the other European countries whose money they're taking and not paying back, which hurts their economy. Furthermore, it actually decreases the legitimacy of a government, because why would you want to interact with a government that just takes your money and leaves? That's not something that they want to do. So the nation of Cyprus as whole would be hurt. So as we can see, is that the sovereignty would actually decrease. And lastly, our last voters look to the turns. How we turn sovereignty, saying that the negative world can actually increase sovereignty even more, and that the affirmative world actually decreases it because they're violating the democratically elected president's words. And furthermore, we can see that we've turned the positive impact. So looking at the affirmative right now is that they have no real way to stand. They haven't proved that the harms that exist by leaving the eurozone and the eurozone would be outweigh the goods by defaulting, right? So staying in it clearly has more benefits than the harms they could produce, because we've turned the harm. So if you look at the offense coming off the AC, there is none of it left. Because we've turned really their two contentions. And furthermore, just looking at the overall aspect of this debate is that really the money that's coming into Cyprus right now, these $10 billion, is really the most important thing, is that this idea of bailouts. And although bailouts haven't worked in the past in countries like Ireland and Greece, the IMF and the Eurozone's new policy towards this idea of bailing out countries is giving them the loans the government can use. As long as the government isn't corrupt and acts within the best interests of the people, this government can then allocate the funds in ways that it sees fit. And when the ways it sees fit are stimulating the three main sectors of the Cypriotic economy, and for these reasons we see that the negation should win this debate. I urge you to vote negative. Thank you.
Is everyone ready? I'm just going to go over moderations. So, starting my time now, the first thing I want to go over is the issue of whether or not Cyprus is in the European Union, and eventually come to the conclusion it doesn't really matter in this round, because no one's impacted it out to anything. So first, they are in the European Union. This is just a fact. They're part of the European Union and the eurozone. It's possible for them to leave the eurozone without leaving the European Union, as we both suggested with the examples of Britain. But I don't think this is really significant in this round. They haven't proven any impacts of being in the European Union besides trade, but I'm going to get to that later in my speech, and I'll link it back when I bring that up. So let's look at the world of the status quo and then the world of the affirmation. The world of negation, which is the status quo, and then the world of the affirmation. I'm going to examine it in terms of a few things they said in the round, and then look at the three key sectors of the economy, and discuss the impacts on each of those and weigh what they are on each side. So first, with the status quo, you need to look at some of the things that are going on in Cyprus right now. No one is allowed to take money out of the country. No one's allowed to bring money in the country. There's a 10% tax on all banks, so you can't see any investment. No one's going to invest in the bank when there's suddenly this 10% higher tax. So they're going to lose they're losing foreign investment in the status quo. Furthermore, there are limits on people's interaction with banks. You can only take out or give so much money per day, and there are extreme riots. Now, none of these things were ever contended by the negation, so you can assume that all of these things are true in the round. There's essentially stagnation in the economy. No one can do anything when you can't take money out of banks, you can't put money into banks, banks can't interact with each other, and there's a 10% tax. So you really this Cypriot economy can't do anything right now. The negation hasn't combated that. So if you vote for the negation, you can assume that all of these things are true moving forward. And I'll impact these out later on. Furthermore, you're going to see debt. You're not going to see any reduction in debt. They talked about in their speech how the money's just going to stimulus plans, but then they said it was also going to pay off loans. You can't really stimulate the economy and also pay off loans at the same time. So they haven't really been clear about where exactly they think the money is going, but they have been very clear that it is not going to paying off the debt. So you can assume that the debt is going to stay extraordinarily high. This means that there are lots of taxes on the debt, and they need to lower the debt in the status quo because it's extraordinarily important for the progression of their economy. And this happens in the affirmations world and not the negations world. This is why they are so unstable, because they have such a high debt. And the debt is kind of where all their problems start, and if they can't reduce the debt in the negation world, they should be voting for the affirmation. Furthermore, they talk about how they're going to lose the bailout money if they leave. However, they've already gotten the bailout money. It's not like they can take the money back out of the economy when they leave the eurozone. So this really isn't an impact here. Going on to the affirmation side of the flow, the negation has two main problems with it. Number one, they say that our plan leads to inflation. However, first is that this is fine because people are extraordinarily wealthy and that people have the money to deal with higher prices. We talked about how people receive high wages. The second speaker said in response to this that prices and wages are tied together. That when there are high prices, there are high wages, and when there are low prices, there are low wages. This is true, and it goes towards our side. If when prices are higher, wages are higher, then people can deal with that. And when prices are lower, they said that wages will be lowered as well, and so we'll still be fine. Their second speaker kind of negated this impact. And they compared it to the United States, saying that people in the United States couldn't buy anything. But the situation isn't like the United States. In the United States, people didn't have money, and the government didn't have money. In Cyprus, that's more that the government doesn't have money, but people do have money. So there's a real difference in this comparison. The next thing they said with their plan is that no one wants to trade. With Cyprus. The trade is a really big impact in this round, but right now there is no money coming out of Cyprus. I asked them a question. how is there going to be any trade if you can't have money out of the country? They say, oh, you don't need money for trade. But this really isn't the way the world works right now. People aren't like bartering things, one service for another. And furthermore, they said that 80% of Cyprus's trade is dealing with imports, showing they clearly don't have many exports, so meaning that they need money to trade, need money to buy those imports. And if money can't come out of the Cyprus's banks, they really cannot engage in trade. So we have the benefit of trade on our side, because if they default and leave the eurozone, all these problems with banks will end. Suddenly people will be able to spend money in the banks again. People will be able to take money in. They won't have the 10% tax on banks. So we are seeing the benefits of trade on our side. They haven't proven to you exactly why it is that these trading partners that are in the European Union would stop trading with Cyprus if they leave the eurozone. There's no link here, and so this point really doesn't stand. Now, going on to looking at the three key parts of the economy, we talked about 1, real estate, 2, tourism, 3, business services. We've all agreed that these are 60% of Cyprus's economy and the most important thing in the round. So first, looking at real estate, who has the advantage here? And the affirmation does. We talked about how the currency will be devalued, so it'll be cheaper to build houses, cheaper to buy houses, and this will increase GDP because there's more flow of money. There really wasn't a response to this, right? If you vote for the negation of the status quo, there's no money coming out of banks, so you cannot build houses, so the real estate industry cannot increase and keep moving. No one can take money out of the bank to buy a house. So on the affirmation side, we have the benefit of the real estate industry. Looking at tourism, people go to countries when it is cheap to go there. There was no response to this at all. They just completely dropped the idea of tourism, so we've won this as well. Looking at business services, a lot of this is looking at foreign investment, mainly from Russia. They said that for some reason this will stop, but actually with this, if you vote for the status quo, I'm not going to take a point right now, I have 30 seconds left. Actually, if you vote for their plan, you're going to see a 10% tax on money going into banks, so a decrease in foreign investment. So clearly the affirmation team has won here the three key sectors of the Cypriot economy: 1, real estate; 2, tourism; 3, business services. And so since we've proved advantages to all 3 areas of the economy, we should be winning this round. The 3 main areas of Cyprus' economy will be benefited by leaving the eurozone and creating their own currency. Furthermore, we're going to see an increase in trade. As we talked about, the inflation doesn't really matter in this round. They haven't impacted out to anything. So because we've impacted things out in 3 key areas of the economy, we're going to see more economic growth for Cyprus if they leave the eurozone and start their own country. So you should be voting for the affirmation in this round. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, what school are you from?
Claremont?
What number are we in?
126.
first of all, some of the facts. First of all, the adjective for Cyprus is Cypriot. Second of all, Cyprus is in the European Union.
Are they? Okay.
Third of all, Turkey is not in the European Union or the eurozone. The topic, as you guys may have noticed, has two components, and I think the default part of it was somewhat undercovered. Especially because you guys in your speech are saying that inflation is good because it means that it's easier to pay off the debt, which is, I think the easier way to say that there will be less debt is that there will be less debt because you default on the debt, right? And so I don't understand, like when both teams are trying to impact to like, and this will help reduce the debt. Well, what really helps reduce the debt is just not paying it back. Then on the inflation point, so there was these arguments that said one side said, well, inflation will increase spending, and the other side said, well, inflation will decrease spending. And I just got most of these as like assertions without an explanation of the mechanism of why that would happen. So like, okay, like within most economic theory, I think it's accepted that inflation, if it's not like really high, does increase spending, but like, do you guys understand why?
Why inflation increases spending?
Yeah.
Because things cost less.
More. Things cost
Yeah,
more.
things cost more.
Inflation means things cost more.
Mhm.
So why does that increase spending?
So money's worth less.
Okay, it's actually pretty simple if you think about it. If you have money, you can either spend it now or you can spend it in the future, right? If your money is gradually decreasing in price, you'd rather spend it now while it's still worth something. On the other hand, if there's deflation, that means that if you sit on your money and spend it later, in 10 years your money will be worth a lot more, so you'd rather wait, right?
Mhm.
So if we want people to start spending now rather than sitting on their money, we want to punish them for saving, which is what inflation does. Right, so that explanation needed to have come out. And I don't think, so I think the logical explanation was missing. I also think that like the empirical explanations that you guys were giving in terms of like the Great Depression and so on were not particularly, I mean, they didn't point it out, but like Great Depression was a period of a decade of really deep deflation. So using the Great Depression to say inflation is horrible, I don't think really works. Okay, now on the impacts, right? So I don't get very good impact comparison in the rebuttals of like people telling me what the biggest impacts are and why they're clearly winning them. And so I just sort of, from what was talked going around, it seems to come down to whether or not inflation will help them or hurt them. From you guys, I'm getting high prices, and high prices means that things cost too much and then people starve. Which is fine, like you can go for that. But then that sort of becomes a wash based on like wages and sort of, it seems like wages are balancing out the high prices and vice versa, lower wages and lower, like it seemed like it would balance out somewhat. So I didn't really get a clear explanation. I sort of treated that as a wash. On the other hand, I think the affirmation has some arguments that don't have a lot of ink on them by the negative, which say if there's inflation, that means that like for Cypriots things become more expensive, but for foreigners coming into Cyprus, things are actually less expensive, so they come there to buy houses and do construction and all that, and that increases GDP, which I think is a fairly well terminalized impact. So I'm voting at that, but I would have been very open to voting for the negative if you guys picked some other impact and weighed that. Any questions? Cool.
Okay, so first of all, congrats on Cali Cup. That was a really high quality debate. You guys are really great. You're gonna get all really high speaks.
Yeah.
So that being said, I did also vote for the government team in this round. For me, it really came down to two main points: the bailout point and the deflation, inflation, devaluation point. So for the bailout, that would have been like a really good impact if you could prove that the bailout was somehow going to be like ripped away from them if they were to secede from the eurozone. But because you guys contested with like, well, they've already been given this money, there's no way to really extract it out of the economy because they've already decided where they're going to spend it. there's no proof really that there's going to be some type of really horrible economic detriment to like seceding in terms of the bailout. So that I feel like was your strongest point, that like there's this like doomsday economic situation if you pull out, but I had no link or proof for it. So that's kind of like, that was the strongest point on your case, I thought, especially because a lot of your like decreased imports, decreased trade, if you could have like explained more how being part of the eurozone makes trade, like you mentioned something about like there's like a setup system for it already, so it's like more automated or something, but my understanding is that they already have these trade relations with these countries, and that changing the currency would, unless the other country got like mad at them for doing so, that those trade relations would still be established. So I did agree that there was like not a great link in the decrease in trade, so that's your best point in my opinion was the bailout, but then it was like questionable, is the bailout really going to be taken out? And then another reason voting Gov is that your like three main factors of the economy that are so important did go generally uncontested by the opposition team, so like the real estate market, the tourism, and the investment market. I thought you had a good point with that, like if there is high inflation, I mean, yes, you could have mentioned that like defaulting is like the best way to not have a debt anymore, but you did talk a lot about how inflation makes it easier to pay off that debt, and then also how inflation makes it cheaper for people to come visit and then do touristy things like buy stuff and build houses and that type of thing. So those points going generally uncontested by the opposition, so me government. But high quality round, great job. Thank you.
One other thing, the MG needs to do a significantly better job at signposting.
Yeah, this is messy. What is that?
And the transition point was new.
What?
The transition point was new, I think.
Which one?
Like,
oh,
they will have that transition period during which things will be bad. Like, I'm pretty sure that was new in the rebuttal.